So I'd now like to take the opportunity to introduce Susan Josi, and clearly my paltry attempt to summarize her expansive bio will not do any justice to her exemplary career and her outstanding awards and achievements. That was a mouthful. So Susan was actually not happy with only one postgraduate degree, so she went out and got two. So she has in pharmacy and in business management. She was also awarded the Woman Entrepreneur of the Year in India, a Distinguished Entrepreneur in 2015, and is a United Nations Industrial Development Organization Scholar from India at the University of Ghent in Belgium. Now, currently Susan is the managing partner at Havas Life Sorrento, which is India's most awarded healthcare advertising agency. And it's the only healthcare communication agency in India to win a Cannes Lion. Now, I could go on, but I would be breaking into lunch. So, Susan is spectacularly positioned to talk about influencing the influencers. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ralph. I feel so humbled with that introduction. And once again, thank you so much, Nicholas, and the team here at Singapore who invited me for this very interesting conference. I have been associated with Nicholas from 2002, so it's been really 17 years. And we represent a lot of Nicholas Hall in India. This journey has been one of the most fulfilling journeys of my life, and I must thank Nicholas a lot for this, because it also got me so much closer to consumer healthcare. I came from a pharma world, did a lot of work in the pharma business, and transitioned that a lot into consumer health. So mine is almost a case of RX to OTC, a switch of RX to OTC. So in physical form, that has actually brought in the gravitas of understanding the experts, the influencers, and also how do we use that in the world of consumer. But before that, I get on to a small quiz time. I know that I won a small one yesterday, so I got a small gift, but this time I didn't get a gift for you guys. But I'm going to ask you something which all of you definitely must be aware of. Out of these three leaders, if I just give you maybe 10 seconds, who do you think has had the maximum amount of followers in the world? Anyone? Nicholas says Modi. Who else? Do you know all three of them, right? Anyone else who has another answer? Oh my God, all three of you said everything, right? So yeah, right. It is Obama, who still has a very high followers, is about 182 million followers. But our country's head, Mr. Modi, is not far away. He is today galloping. In 2014, it was just about 20, 30 million, and today he is 110 million followers. And more interestingly, just as recent, I think about a month ago, the report says that he has the maximum Instagram followers, which is 50 million followers. And he's also ahead on Twitter with another 30, 40. So it's just that to tell you that he's got the youth after him, right? He's being able to influence the youth extremely well. And of course, Mr. Trump is not far away, but he's still much, much slower, given the fact that he's in a country and he's in the Western world where there would be so much more people following him. And that's the track record of these people who are on the political in the leadership role. I'm sure we don't have our experts and our influencers in the consumer healthcare notching up these numbers, but surely this is the world in which the entire business of influencing is happening. And I'm here to give you a little preview to the fact that we in consumer healthcare still have a lot of dependence on the experts as influencers. And if you realize, we actually always went through the influencer route, right? We always went through doctors. We got maybe doctors to influence, the pharmacists to influence. Yesterday we had a full session on how the pharmacist is used as an influencer. And today, I'm sure all of you must be knowing that the amount of influence that is happening from the users, the patients, the consumers, and so many other stakeholders in the system, that influence is happening. So I'm not here to give you what you already know. I'm sure you know a lot more that's happening in your own markets, but a more general overview that how is this world of influencers happening in the world of consumer healthcare. So we all know that it's all about, any brand is about an interaction with the consumer. You always had the retailer as your point of care, your touch point. And then in this world, the influencer was more with the HCPs. And as we are progressing today, more and more, there are other influencers that are coming into the system. But for a minute, I'm going to take a step back and start saying that despite having all the other influencers, and I think very well, which Mike rightly put, how are we getting our experts to become more professional social influencers into an online medium? Because if the consumer is going to be on digital and is on digital, what are we doing with our doctors? But how much do we know our doctors? And we actually in Sorrento had done a study in 2016, and this was a study when we saw that from the way the consumer has actually started self-medicating, the self-medication practice has gone almost double. Yeah, the dependence on the chemist was coming down, of course, all because there was so much happening through the internet. Google was obviously becoming their, port of call for asking questions, for getting their questions answered on healthcare. But the role of the doctor did not come down. So which only means that even today, for a lot of consumers, when they are self-medicating, there is that endorsement, there is the influence that is needed from the doctors. And which is a very interesting, if anytime you see the consumer journey, there is always a check back that have I done the right thing? Have I taken the right product? And if the doctor endorses it, there's a huge trust factor that is attached to it. And that's a reason why I'm sure, how much ever consumers will be going online, consumers will be influenced by other influencers. The role of the expert will continue to become important, and possibly we need to know this doctor even more better as to how are we going to leverage this expert in the whole influencer mechanism. So in no way, while we are going to see more influencers in the system, how do we start leveraging this expert? Because he becomes so important, the trust is continued. The pharmacist is actually getting more influenced when the doctor is giving the prescription or endorsing that prescription. And that's the reason why so much of Rx to OTC, at least in our markets, is becoming a norm today. Because when you see more and more consumers are self-buying, the doctor's role is diminishing, but he being the person who has endorsed the brand gets a great influence in the chemist world. And more important, there is a huge long-term loyalty that is there when the doctor is endorsing the product. But how do we increase recommendation from experts? We actually work with a lot of brands in the expert marketing field. Maybe because we also have the pharma heritage. We worked with J&J, GSK, Sanofi, a lot of brands which we are working with. The classic question is, how do I get time inside the doctor's clinic? How do I influence this doctor who knows this brand or who knows this category? Is it easy for me to influence? And I think this is a perennial question in most marketers' mind for brands which are very familiar, which the consumer any which ways knows. And that's one of the reasons why the whole structure works in a pyramidal manner. I'm sure most consumer marketers sitting in this room would know this, that any expert marketing goes through a pyramid, which starts with the highest influence, which is your KOL, and then, of course, comes to the global, the national, and then you have the specialists, and then you have the GPs, and then, of course, there's a layer of the pharmacist or the nutritionist or the physiotherapist, and, of course, at the bottom, there are also consumers who are using products, and they become influencers in their own way. The real question is, how do we get strong KOLs onto our advocacy? How do we get some of these specialists coming and talking about brands like, we know brands where we have to give it to pediatrics. If you have to give it to children, how do you get pediatricians to endorse your brands? we've done some real great work in this space. As recent as just about a year ago, we were handling one of the largest electrolyte brands of J&J in India. And we actually went and created guidelines of how you can help children get electrolytes during diarrhea management. What is the way to do it? How does a liquid product do better than maybe a solid powder, which was more familiar there? And then we actually started seeing that the interaction with your KOLs becomes so much more meaningful when you start seeing the way you start interacting with these doctors. So it's not just about saying that, if it is an OTC brand, I really have only that contact with maybe the general practitioners or maybe the RMPs, the registered medical practitioners. But to go up the ladder, to go up to those KOLs, there could be so many more tools and techniques to go up to interact with those KOLs. And there are ways to do it once you start seeing the ecosystem in which your brand works. I think very interestingly, GSK, there was a presentation in the morning on GSK on sensitivity. We've done a lot of work on Sensodyne even in India, where we did very interesting work with dentists to get them to understand what about sensitivity they should be knowing more than what they actually might have been even taught in schools. So this actually comes with a lot more knowledge, with a lot more data points, with which you start interacting with the KOLs, so that you actually create a much bigger surround sound around your category. And within that, of course, your brand comes in the preview, but interacting with KOLs can have a very, very distinctive impact on your brand, even if it is a consumer healthcare brand. And I can give you a lot of examples where we have done this kind of work. And I urge a lot of consumer healthcare companies that science becomes the bedrock, because that differentiates your gummy versus a candy, right? But when you start building that science and building it with that sense of evidence, there can be so much more trust and loyalty that you're building with your brand. So expert influence is a completely different kettle of fish. And we need to know how to do this expert influence in a much more detailed manner rather than being flippant about managing experts. Having said that, we, of course, follow this entire cycle, whether it is inspiring them, educating them, continuously interacting with the KOLs. But in this era and day, we're still stressed for resources, right? Do I have the time? And look at consumer healthcare budgets, right? They would largely be ATL, and now there's digital. So HCPs get very little share of that budget, right? So I really need to know my HCPs. I really need to look at how I can target these expert influencers with as much, it's all about less is more. The resources are so well strategically used that I really know whether I'm targeting the right HCPs. It is not enough to say that I'm going to 10,000 HCPs. But even if I'm going to those targeted HCPs, are they giving me value? Are they giving me the support that I need for my brand? Maybe it's just a voice of authority. Maybe it is getting into a organized group of doctors and talking about my category or my product. And that makes a difference. So when we do that, what we did, in fact, this is something that we did about 3 to 4 years back, and we're actually working on this data point more and more, is that how much do we know our doctors? How do we segment our doctors? Just a question to the team here. Whoever is, you guys have been obviously working in your space for HCPs. How do you normally segment your doctors? Any answers? ABC, but what is ABC? Pardon? Influence and affinity. Yeah, sure. What else is the depth with which you go and see your experts? Do you see them differently? Do you see them as just pediatricians and KOLs and gastroenterologists and general practitioners? Or do we see them a little more different as to how they think, feel, do, which is the holy grail of what they currently think, feel, do versus what they kind of have a desired think, feel, do. And what we have done in the last 3-4 years is actually dissecting doctors not on just qualification. So they will obviously be qualified. They will be having a KOL mapping. But what would be interesting is how do we see them from a psychographic profile? How do we see them from a very different lens than just being the professional, qualified doctors that we see them? And this exercise that we've done has actually given us a very different kind of expert marketing tool for the organizations that we work with. We call it as a value graphic profiling. I don't know if, I'm sure maybe a few companies here must be doing it, but anyone in this audience has actually attempted doing a psychographic profiling of their doctors. I know you do it for consumers, because that's what consumer healthcare companies are really good at. But have you ever done it for your doctors? Steve, yes? Sure must have been in RB or later?
No, it was actually just after using psychographic techniques with
Yes.
healthcare practitioners to
Yes.
understand how they think
Differently.
from the normal population.
Anyone else?
I think it was more in Mead Johnson.
Mead Johnson, you've done that?
Formula.
Infant formula with pediatricians.
Yes.
Anyone else in the group has seen this? Yeah? Yeah, Gautam must be having some examples that we've done in India, right? But just to give you a sense, we've done this and we feel that this is a very, very interesting way of segmenting doctors because it actually tells you what kind of tools you can use for influencing your doctors. I'll give you some examples. It's a detailed presentation, a detailed study, and we often do it on our client doctor list. But it's more or less bucketed into 4. I'm not using jargons because I can give you how research companies will use names, but just a simple 4 bucket tool. There are doctors who are highly patient-centric, yeah? And I think when you go through the kind of experts you meet, you'll start seeing this in your mind. There are doctors who are very transactional, business. I have this much time, you're coming and meeting me, tell me what you'll give me and what will I give you. So I will influence basis what you give me. There are doctors who are very peer-centric. They want to be seen among their peers as something better. Their image is very important. So they want everything that you could do as an organization to help build their image. And the last is doctors who are highly academic-oriented. So they are totally into, do you have the evidence? Where is the book? Where are the guidelines? I would like to be part of it. Do you want to do a study with me? Can I do the post-marketing surveillance? So the conversations are always very academic in nature. So definitely their motivators are different. Yeah, you will see that the patient-centric wants a lot around the patient support services, what you do for his patients. What are you doing for my patients? Can I be doing something with you for my patients? So they want to do OPD camps, they want to do patient programs, and they want to be seen very familiar with their patients. Business-centric, materialistic, they have, I'm not saying that doctors are not, but there is a certain, kind of flavor which these doctors interact with the community. Peer-centric, I just mentioned, and academic, I just mentioned. So if you see from an expectation, it's mapping them, it's finding what motivates them, and therefore, what are their expectations? And their expectations change as per what their motivations are. So again, it's not a simple thing that you put a kind of a form and you ask people, do you believe in this? But it's actually going and doing question. It's almost like how you do Thomas profiling for people who join your organization, right? It's pretty detailed. I'm not saying this is as detailed, but you actually start seeing doctors in a very, very different light. Because this then tells you what really could work. So I'm giving you an example of how we saw a patient-centric engagement activity for our experts when you want to go with your brands. So for a patient-centric doctor, it's all about, can I get samples on demand when some of my patients who can't afford, I want to give them something which makes me seen as someone, like he's obviously interacting with his patients and he wants to be seen someone as a little more generous than what he is. And most of the time today, patients are evaluating their doctors in that light. Many times, in fact, we have had these very interesting situations where doctors are doing programs with patients. They're doing it online, they're doing it offline. There is a very interesting tool that we have found in India, which has started is called as Walk with the Doctor. So every Sunday there is a small walk that a doctor has with his patients, and they talk about simple disease issues that is affecting. It could be anything as much as a general health problem, or it could be something that like dengue or malaria. They would like to just talk about it to their patients so that they're much more informed and much more evolved. And I'm talking about not just general practitioners, but even KOLs wanting to do this, because they know today the quotient that the kind of relationship they have with their patients matter a lot. And who can influence that and who can help that build is companies like us. Talk with the doctors, in-clinic talk shows, building communities. So you could actually populate this even more than what I've written here. But you could actually start seeing your doctor in this light and start engaging with this doctor in a very different manner. Versus that, if you start looking at someone who is peer-oriented, yeah, he's looking for platforms like this. Is he able to talk to more number of doctors? Is he able to be on different seminars? Can you use him for CME programs? Can you use him for specific international programs? So his motivation is very different. You may say that, do they exist actually in silos like this? May not. You may find a bit of Venn diagrams. But if you get this identified more closely, you will actually start using your tools much better, with a much better ROI and much higher engagement quotient for your brands. So this is how doctors are. I could possibly look at more ways of how we can populate each of these doctors' engagement activity. But I just wanted to give you a flavor of how these doctors need to be interacted. So one big question: what are doctors doing on the digital world? We've seen how consumers interact on digital. What are they doing? We yesterday had a great presentation from Hello Doctor. And interestingly, he's actually launched something which is in Hindi in India called Hello Swasthya. And I was really impressed to know that how closer they're getting to the consumer to help bridge the gap between the doctor and the consumer. So doctors are also online, but they are obviously spending a lot more time for themselves, for improving their professional knowledge, their engagement with their peers. It's like most of us do right on LinkedIn, right? We are on LinkedIn so much. Most of the time it's just to know what's happening where, which company is doing what are your peers up to, what's going on in the professional world. And the same context is what doctors are doing, whether it is on Curify, whether it's on Hello Doctor, whether it is on Google or WhatsApp. It's all about professional interactions. And most of the time, their interactions are about knowledge upgrading. It's about their CMEs which are happening, what kind of insights are coming from these tools, updating their access to guidelines, visibility, networking, and follow-up. So these are 3 or 4. In fact, this was again a study that we had done with doctors to know what kind of professional reasons, what professional reasons they have, or what is their interest of being online? What are they doing with the digital medium? How are they interacting with the digital medium? And we see that this is something which is actually becoming more and more important, because this was, again, a very recent study that was done in 2017, that if we see the kind of efficiency of a channel based on the reach, you'll find that after the medical representatives, which is right there, the reach that most of the digital channels have is very high, but the influence of some of the KOL webinars, the remote engagement tools, the web detailing, the self-directed web detailing, are all actually gaining far more traction. So what would have been our dependence a lot on the reps is coming down if we can start planning the entire digital engagement tools in a much more effective way. And now it comes actually more interesting, because if you know your experts and their motivations and understand them even better, your engagement from a remote tool will actually be far more favorable and outcome-led. Because most of the time when we have depended on our reps, we are so dependent on what our reps tell the doctors. Now you have actually the ability to not have the reps in between, but you are engaging with these doctors in a much more remote manner. So there are ways in which this influencer pyramid or this influencer management is changing. And we actually have taken advantage of this. We've been doing programs to doctors using mobile CMEs. You can imagine in a country like India, which is similar with China and which is similar with Indonesia, that after the urban presence of doctors, we have obviously, when 70% of our patients are in the rural area or consumers are in the rural area, the doctors have to be connected in a very different manner. So we have been actually doing a lot of these tools of engaging with doctors using mobile CMEs. We have created something called as School of CME, where doctors can just come up and we can give them access to KOLs from urban center to interact with doctors from the rural areas. And in that, plug in your main messages or your key messages when you're interacting with them. Having said that, what would be, this was again a study which just happened a couple of months ago, that who are the top 15 healthcare influencers redefining this industry? So this was something which they had done in US market, and it was interesting because I was just trying to find out that really how are doctors being online? How are they interacting with patients? Really, are they doing a job of selling themselves? Are they doing a job of really influencing the patient? And you will be surprised that who are these healthcare influencers? Do you have any guesses? Who would be these stakeholders that we are calling as healthcare in the online world? Any guesses how this works? Out of this 15, how many would be doctors? None. Pretty much there. Pretty much there. Just 2 doctors, 1 nurse, 1 pharmacist, and that's 4. And all of the rest of the 11 belong to a completely different group. They are patients. They are media representatives. They are writers. They are people who are journalists. So the same professional guys who know their categories well, who know the products well, who know the health ailment well, they are not online. They're really not online. So who is influencing? It's patients, it's media journalists, and these people who are the doctors are actually not there online. And when we check this further, because we did some analysis, in fact, just about a few months ago, we were doing an analysis, really who are the doctors online who are creating an influencer map on the consumer's life? It's very few. The followers are much, much lesser compared to maybe what we see from the other influencers, like even mother bloggers, the women who are influencing the childcare products. Compared to that, also an HCP influencer community is very low. The real reason is they're pretty unaware how to present themselves on a Facebook, on an Instagram, on a Twitter. They do write, they do make their comments, but they are not doing it in a more focused way. Obviously, they all talk about time being an issue. They don't have the time, they don't have the content. But remember, today the largest influencers are celebrities who have so much more busy than what they are. They are ghostwritten. There are articles ghostwritten for these influencers. They are managed. These influencers are managed by others. Do you think that someone like Mr. Modi or even Obama, they would write a few, but after that, it's a complete ecosystem that they create to build this influencer. And I seriously think that this is such a big gap in our industry, that we really don't have the professional healthcare teams or healthcare people online doing an influencer approach to consumers. Because in fact, it was just a thought that I was thinking yesterday when I was looking at those 5 or 10 digital marketing or the awards or the presentations which were done for the awards. I didn't see much being talked about using influencers or influencer marketing as a strategy for our healthcare brands. I don't know if it is because it's the same in India. We don't have so much of usage of influencers in this category in our country, and I saw it in Asia Pac. But we're doing some programs for US from India, and we found that the first thing they ask you is, can you do a detailed influencer marketing program? Can you come up with a complete influencer strategy program? And they are actually, you all must be knowing that this whole world of influencer marketing is becoming a business by itself. You have to it's a complete way to go about influencer marketing. It actually means stepwise ways of managing it. There is a whole system which is done to create an influencer marketing program, but let me tell you, it works brilliantly for brands which are using it effectively. We're just working on one for a sleep aid product in US, and we are finding so much of traction just because we have tapped into the right influencers to talk about the category, to talk about the product, and it is working on it. But unfortunately, we still have not developed the healthcare professionals to start becoming our influencers on the online channel. So, friends, definitely, it's this whole piece beyond the doctors and within that system that we are obviously today dependent on, whether it is the nutritionist, whether it is the experts, whether it is patients and the bloggers and the celebrities. And they are actually today creating a larger influencing ecosystem. So while I don't have great examples of how doctors have created an influencer ecosystem, I'm going to share with you a few examples and case studies of how the other influencers have been used effectively in consumer healthcare as influencers. So we all know what is setting this trend, right? And like I said earlier, we actually from consumer healthcare have been the front runners of influencer, but we have not used it effectively from an online perspective. But we know that when there are, these are statistics which are very, very recent statistics which talk about what is the reason and why is the reason that influencer marketing is growing so much. 92% of buyers trust when an influencer or someone who has got that kind of a followership being talked about a brand. They are highly likely to follow a recommendation given by a micro-influencer. I will come to the distinction of the influencers a little later. 40% of Twitter users say they made a purchase directly because of an influencer, right? And it delivers 11 times greater returns when you invest in an influencer than a traditional form of advertising and marketing. In fact, it's very interesting. This is a lovely quote. I realized that influencers can become the next contract sales force for your organization. Yeah? I think we all invest in franchise teams. We all invest in contract sales force. Imagine a battery of influencers who are talking to this the new generation, the millennials, and they're all online and they are looking at the way people are reviewing brands. Everyone is worried, what's the review happening on Amazon? What's the review happening on other channels? How are people talking about my brand? And if there is a great influencer talking about their product, it's very critical that you're using that entire channel to become your second line sales team for your brand. And that's a very different lens with which you see influencers. You're not just pampering their egos, but you're really using them very effectively for your marketing tool. And why is so important in healthcare? Because more and more media ads, display ads are becoming a blind spot. It's a great head start for triggering conversations. It rides on existing credibility and trust. There's a credibility, there's a followership, there's already a trust that is established, and their own experience have empowered into them being partners for our brand. I think this is a very important point because if you see, why do patients become so important as influencers? Why do the mothers become so important as influencers? Why are kids becoming so important as influencers? Because their own experiences is what they are transposing and they are kind of broadcasting to the world. And that has a greater impact than what would happen if it was not from the same. In fact, if you realize, we always use word of mouth. We always said that, I'll go and ask my mother, or I'll ask my family, I'll ask my friends, but this was personal in that sense. The whole experience has been now shifted from an online perspective. So just the same pyramid that I drew for the doctor community, the same pyramid in a very different scope is now coming up as far as the influencers are concerned. So at the top of the pyramid are the celebrities. I think we use them a lot in all our ads, right? I'm sure consumer healthcare companies use them very, very frequently because you want to surrogate the doctor's trust to someone who is looked upon or trusted by the consumer. So they are the mega influencers. Then you have social media celebrities. So you have celebrities who may not be the film stars or the television stars, but they are very big on the social media circuit. Professional bloggers who are actually in the space of macro influencers. Then you have some thought leaders who are independent voices. And of course, you have a lot of micro influencers. And this is actually the community that you can really, really tap into. So it's a science by itself. How do you identify these influencers? What do you do with them? I can only touch upon it, but anyone who is interested, they can actually find a lot of data and understanding on how to use influencer marketing. And I would urge you, haven't seen success on few brands, these community of influencers can make a great difference to your brand. So you have Serena Williams here with Sistine. We have our Virat Kohli, who's supposed to be India's biggest star in cricket. He's there on almost 35 to 37 brands today. And he is one of the biggest celebrity influencer for the youth. I mean, whoever is online, if they see something coming out of this man, it actually gets multiplier effects, So it's how you're using him and his Twitter handle, his Facebook handle, his account, Instagram handle. These are all being used in multiple ways when they're dealing with brands. Of course, it's critical to see how you're kind of imprinting your brand on this particular brand. We're just going through this exercise now because we have signed on one of the leading cricketers for a pre-diabetes and pre-disease range of products. They're supplements. But we're actually doing more homework on the celebrity than the brand because we would like to see that we're not far away from what the celebrity brand really means on the social circuit. And what he's saying and how he's saying and what his consumers are taking out of him makes a lot of impact on how we will use him for the brand that we are associating him. So the homework that you do in selecting your influencer is very, very critical. We also have celebrity HCPs. There are pediatricians and there are some of the doctors. Have you seen this as a very, very recent thing that they are almost getting more online, less of, maybe they're all, we have a lot of them sitting at home sometimes, doctors who are married and they're not doing their practice. They look at this as a very, very interesting alternative income. But of course, they're not trained. And that's, I think, a gap. And that can be handled. But they're actually becoming very strong in the pediatric space in trying to getting an influencing community being formed with their professional qualifications. But this is an opportunity. This opportunity is what I always think. If someone can start putting some thought and approach, we have a lot of these micro-influencers, or if I may call them macro-influencers, from their professional background who can be used to influence on your brands. So it's all about searching. Yeah, you have to know what kind of reach, what kind of resonance, what kind of relevance that particular influencer has. Screen them very thoroughly because you have to know what kind of conversations they are doing on the online medium. And finally, of course, select. So while they are popular and they may be very, very knowledgeable, but how relevant and how important they are for our brands is a very definitive exercise that we know when we are taking up influencers. You will be surprised. We always get this question, how do I know and where do I go and get these influencers? This business is just growing. So from 2014, where there were 190 platforms and agencies who were looking at influencers, today there are almost 720 platforms which can give you how do you kind of screen, select, identify, do the due diligence. But again, I must tell you, it's not so much in healthcare. We obviously get them for cars and consumer goods and durables and houses and real estates. But when it comes to healthcare and consumer healthcare is still far and few. So golden opportunity if anyone wants to set up a business in identifying influencers for consumer healthcare, because trust me, there are not many who have been able to do this right, maybe because it's still a little bit more science and understanding and developing their knowledge and training them continuously in handling the kind of queries and the kind of posts that you will put out over there. I want to give you just the next 2-3 minutes on one or two of the brand examples. This was a brand which actually was built in just last 2 years. Like Maruk asked this very interesting question that how do you deal with brands that you're handling only from an online perspective? So this is completely digital, doing extremely well, so much so that J&J, which is the #1 company in baby care in India, has started taking note of them and has started feeling challenged because they have actually addressed the new age mothers through their organic products for skincare, for baby care, and of course they are fast growing with all their range of the products. Their biggest strategy is using influencer marketing. They literally launch brands. They leverage it through the influencers. They have a lot of influencer sessions. They literally have them maybe twice or thrice or 4 times a week in different cities, get a lot of data, a lot of crowdsourcing content, but obviously their products are also very good. And they have been using this as their biggest marketing tool. Like I said, their contract sales force is online. And that's exactly what they've spent their time and effort in developing for their brand. Now, to give you another example, a company like J&J, what they did, when they had a challenge with their ingredient, the liquid paraffin, and of course they were getting a lot of pushback in many markets about the use of liquid paraffin in their products, and they actually did something very interesting, again using influencers. So they actually started addressing the myths associated with their brands by having sessions with influencers and at a very high level. Look at this video.
Welcome to the class of 2019.
The combined reach of people sitting in this classroom is 25 million.
All of us have probably heard of some of the media articles where there were reports of Rajasthan Drug Control testing samples of Johnson's Baby shampoo and the reported presence of formaldehyde. So we worked with them and requested in the magistrate court for a retest, and I am so happy that test reports came back and confirmed that there is no formaldehyde in Johnson's Baby shampoo.
These are your monitors. They are going to lead you to your classroom.
So if you go to every room that you see here, it's a room of experiments. So you're actually going and you're experiencing products, experiencing fragrances. You're understanding the utility of what is being put into your skincare products by learning by doing.
Every substance that is useful for human beings only works best at an optimal dose.
I'm glad Johnson & Johnson has bought the Turn to Learn campaign.
The session we had here today plays a very important part where you're actually turning the bottle and reading what everything stands for, what are you putting on your baby, is it safe?
The entire day session has been extremely insightful, extremely empowering, a lot of information, and we're just having so much fun.
School of Gentle was honestly way better than my school days, attending the classes, doing the practicals, asking questions in such a fun way, and the best part was being able to use my phone.
I think Johnson's done an amazing job of putting this together for us.
Isn't that brilliant, right? A very, very powerful idea, very powerful tool to bust the myth, to actually get them experience. And I think you heard it the first time, they have a combined reach of reaching 25 million consumers because each of them have got a certain million consumer followers as influencers. So they are powerful influencers. And it's so interesting because you just have to do things which are different, which get them to experience your brand. And we actually do that now. We actually identify these influencers, give them samples, get them to talk about it, get the experience on. And that's really, really a force multiplier, which many times we don't realize what it can do to our brand. Having said that, just 2 more slides. I know I'm between you and lunch, which is always what is told before lunch. How much of paid content and how much of sponsored content should be? It should not be that much because the ideal ratio is 1 sponsored content to 5 posts. I mean, these are science and theories which have been done on influencer posts, and that is very critical. And the last, very, very important is how do you create clear rules of engagement? Your service level agreements have to be very strong. You need to have a lot of understanding of the FDA rules and what they can say and they cannot say, because I'm just going to show you an example of what happened with one thing in India recently and also globally. So if you see this, this was an ad that Priyanka Chopra, I think you must be knowing, she's one of the star celebrity of India, and she did this
जब पता चला मुझे
for asthma.
मम्मी डॉक्टर थी, इसीलिए उन्हें मालूम था इनहेलर्स गोलियों से बेहतर है। पर सबको लगा जिंदगी भर आदत तो नहीं लगेगी। नहीं लगी, बल्कि आदत लगी खुल के सांस लेने की। बड़े सपने देखने की।
आदत लगी बेरोक जीने की।
इनहेलर्स हैं एस्थमा को मैनेज करने का बेस्ट तरीका। इनमें गोलियों के मुकाबले काफी कम डोज होता है क्योंकि ये सीधे फेफड़ों में असर करते हैं।
इनहेलर्स खुल के अपनाओ, जियो बेरोक जिंदगी।
And Cipla obviously used it, absolutely went berserk on it, on media, on social media. All her social media handles were used. And oops, what happened after that? She was smoking with Nick Jonas. So there was a huge troll which happened. And it went the wrong way. Literally went the wrong way. I mean, would the company have a control on her smoking and someone clicking it? Or she must have put it on her Instagram handle or her Twitter handle or whatever it was. And that really, really went wrong. In fact, there was another big example of Kim Kardashian also did the same thing. She went, all out talking about using a product for managing pregnancy, nausea, and vomiting. And it was a RX brand. And the FDA pulled her up, and then she had to come back again with another story saying, guys, I'm sorry, the FDA has told me not to tell this to you, but, I have to take a pushback. So very, very careful of what they can say, what they can't say. We need to have the foresight. We need to know what they're going to be, talking about in their posts, and we should be able to monitor that. So friends, with that, I think there is a huge part in this whole influencer category that we are talking, not negating the doctors, not negating our experts. One, how do we cultivate them? And B, how do we look at this larger world of influencers that is happening on the online space? Thank you very much.
Well done. Well done.